We can begin. Okay, we can begin, Arjun. So, folks, thanks for joining in on this Saturday morning. It's a pleasure having Arjun Majumdar with us here. Arjun is the CEO and founder of Indiahikes, India's largest trekking organization. And Indiahikes has revolutionized the trekking industry altogether in India and globally as well, putting India's undiscovered treks and trails in the global maps and while keeping sustainability intact, keeping the mountains clean. So that's a great initiative by you, Arjun, and it's a pleasure having you with us here. Very fast. Moving forward, like as you all know, the journey of a billion miles, let's say, begins with a small step, right? So would like to know about your early life experience. What inspired you to start Indiahikes?
Indiahikes kind of started out of my passion for trekking. I was trekking since I was a very young child, maybe about 8 years old. My father was working for the bank, the State Bank of India. So at that time, he would very often go for inspection duties. And, even bank branches need to be inspected. So he would go for inspection duties, and he would choose these branches which nobody would want to go to. And they were all in the far-flung corners of our country, in Spiti, in Lahore, in Kashmir, in Uttarakhand, and he would often take us with him. So, and we would go on these fascinating journeys with him in these remotest corners of our country. So I have been to Kashmir maybe 2 or 3 times, even before terrorism had started in our country. So I'm talking about that era. So, and then, while my father was inspecting branches and so on, I would, and my brother and I, we would wonder what is behind this hill, what is behind something over there. Iska aage kya hai, uske piche kya hai, not knowing that it's not very smart for a 9-10-year-old to just wander off like that. But then now I'm a little older, a little wiser. But that's how my interest in the mountains came. And by the time I was in my 20s, I was already trekking and, exploring and trying to find out, about more treks. So in my 20s, I was very actively, conducting and organizing my own treks with my friends. And that's how the love grew. So knowing about the problems of the trekking world is something which I know from a very young age, about what the problems are of the trekking world. And that kind of led to the start of Indiahikes, in the sense that, we used to do tent talks. You go in a tent and you want to talk and you talk about a lot of things. And these are some of the things we would very often do in our tent talks is that, why is trekking so difficult in a country? How will people trek in a country? Where will our next trek be? They're trying to solve these problems is where we all realized, my friends and I, that trekking in our country was very difficult. It was not easy. And trekking would continue to stay difficult and not easy unless there was a change in how people looked at trekking. And that fundamental change was about information. If we could get more information about treks, then people would go out and do treks. Because when I'm talking about the Zamana, when I was trekking, very few people trekked in that country, very, very few. You could count them on your fingertips. So if information about trekking was so scarce, and I'm talking about pre-internet era, or internet was just breaking into a country, if I have to call it. And it would stay that way. And so that's the biggest problem that I wanted to solve is that, how we can get information out to people. And at that time, internet was just coming into our country, and I realized that internet was a good medium for that, to exchange, to share information. And this led to me being very, that initial email started coming in. The initial social media started coming in. Now I'm talking about social media, not like how we see it today. It's not the Facebooks or the, WhatsApps or Pinterest or Instagram that we see today. I'm talking about those zamana when we had MySpace and those kind of things, much before Google even came into that picture. Those were the early days. Yahoo was Yahoo chats and all those things were very popular. Yeah. And then came Orkut. And then, so you would find me in those places talking about treks and, taking information, giving out information, helping people out. So this is that key, that whole crux was the information, giving and taking information kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So this kind of led to that early, where it was very clear that we would uh, we need to share information.
Mhm. Got it. Got it. And like moving forward with your experience, you built an education company prior to India Hikes, right? So how was that experience, and how did that help you in terms of building India Hikes altogether?
My family and I, we were running a chain of language training institute in Bangalore. It was a chain. So we started very early when I was 21, 22. So I've never worked anywhere. Like most people generally work somewhere. So after I passed out, I didn't work anywhere. So my father and I, my father was working for the bank. He retired. He took a voluntary retirement actually, and we started this language training institutes in our country in Bangalore, and that became fairly successful. And prior to that, we had an organization where we used to learn, we used to organize courses through distance learning for advertising and marketing. So all my grounding on advertising, marketing, and doing it ourselves for ourselves, kind of laid that foundation for later on Indiahikes. I did that for almost 14 years before I started Indiahikes. So it was not a small period of time. So from my age of 21, 22 to almost 35, 36 is when I was doing that. And that spread. We had about 20 odd branches in Bangalore. We had branches in Chennai, in Kolkata. It was a fairly big kind of an organization. It had many offshoots. So we were learning over there on how to do things. So almost a lot of my learning that came from that organization kind of was transferred to Indiahikes. So Indiahikes didn't have to face a lot of teething problem which generally most startups would have to face.
Makes sense. You had like a fairly good experience in entrepreneurship before deep diving into building India Heights, right? So, how important is that? Like most of the folks joining in us here are at their very early stage of building a startup. So, how should they leverage their current experience of whatever they are building, may it be successful, may it be a failure in general in the long run, to build their next big thing? How important is having a business experience or hands-on business experience in the early days?
I would say very, very important. It doesn't matter whether we succeed or we fail, but the learnings out of it is what stays with you. A lot of small things, how to manage people, how to do a little bit of marketing, how to do, a lot of these things, how to talk with vendors, and a lot of these chota mota things which come in, which really, really help in, the next venture that you are doing.
Mhm. Makes sense. Makes sense. Moving forward, let's talk about the 0 to 1 story of India Heights. How was the organization born? Did you do your initial research, or was it just following your passion and starting it out? Would love to hear that from you.
See, as I was telling you the story about how Indiahikes started, so what information was the crux of the problem, and I knew that see, in our country, that Wikipedia model doesn't work. But you put out information and people will come forward and access that information, because in our country, there are, at least at that time, there were two problems. Most people were not very familiar with that Wikipedia kind of a thing. And two, most people, at least the trekkers and who I know carried information, were not very comfortable in writing in English. At that time, internet was totally and absolutely an English medium, platform. Right now, today, it is, all kind of languages we are using. But at that time, it was English, and people found it very difficult to contribute their thoughts or write things in English, which held them back. And here I was trying to put forward information in English, and I knew when I would ask my friends, why don't you add your tracks, they would find it very difficult. They couldn't articulate, they couldn't remember and put all those details down into English. So my start of Index, I knew this is one problem, that if an organization is required to put this information up so that people can access and use this information. So as a kind of a test, I had written a guide on one of the treks that I had done. And that guide went into not 200-300 words or 500 words, it went to 7,000, 8,000 words. It had every
Wow.
turn, everything about that trek, how to do it. That trek was called the Rupkund trek. And I'm talking about 13, 14 years ago. And I released it online, and that became a sensation.
Mhm.
People started using it. Trekkers discovered that they could do a high altitude trek in the Himalayas, which they had not conceived of. That it was not possible for people to do such a grand trek as Rupkund, which went to 15,500 feet on their own. It kind of gave them confidence that I could use this guide and just follow the guide to the T and then do the trek on my own. So hundreds of trekkers started doing that. They started using the guide and trekking. And the local people over there kind of uh, they were also very surprised about what is happening. Why so many people coming here? And everyone is referring to the guide. Everyone is saying, Arjun ji ne bataya mujhe jana hai. So they were using that guide and they were doing that trek, and they wouldn't want to deviate even a 30 seconds from that guide. If the guide said go there, they will say no. They would, and no matter what the local people say, नहीं ये रास्ते से जाएंगे, वो रास्ते से जाएंगे, नहीं 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 वहाँ नहीं, वो अर्जुन जी ने बताया यही रास्ते लेना है. So it kind of became, and for the local people, suddenly that whole place where there was no treks happening, that whole region started becoming a place where trekking started happening. And the people started saying, you know what, this is something extraordinary happening here because we have never seen something like this before. And I would keep getting calls from trekkers, from local people saying, what is this happening? What is this sensation that is happening in our country? And it was very easy for me to, kind of put these two things together, that credible information was the crux of this whole problem, that if you put up a credible information, trekkers benefit, local people benefit, everybody benefits. So it required uh, us to put up that credible information. But the whole problem is nobody is going to pay you for credible information. So how do you earn your money for starting an organization? And the next best thing is to solve the other problem, which was conducting of treks itself. Because I have been doing treks for almost 10, 15 years by then. And I knew that conducting treks was so difficult for anybody to do a mounted trek. And I wanted people to trek the way I was visualizing it and the way we saw trekking had to be done. So I realized that if we could organize treks, that income could help us to kind of document trails. So this was the basic premise of Indiahikes. That was almost 13, 14 years ago. And it is still the basic premise of Indiahikes. We're still documenting trails. We're still
Yeah.
putting up information. We're still bringing out new treks. And we organize treks the way we visualize with that certain spirit of trekking, with the certain values and principles in which we want trekking to grow in our country. So this essentially is the story of Indiahikes, if you ask me.
Very interesting. So, like 14 years back, when you were doing a startup as Indiahikes, that to a tech startup, right? You are solving the problem of information discovery about treks. It wasn't so mainstream. Right now, startup is really, really mainstream in general, right? So, during that point of time, you discovered a problem which trekkers face because you had certain uh, 14 years of experience doing trekking yourself by that point of time. So I think it was very important to discover that problem, a burning problem which a particular community of people are facing, and then moving forward and solving them. So that is a kind of interesting note that I'm taking away from this. Moving forward, let's talk about your growth. In general, let's say an information discovery blog. It became viral because of your own experience, your own personal touch. People started referring to each other. Just a simple thing, but the product has the power to uh, be viral, right? In general. Then moving forward, how did you build the organization from this basics? Like right now, also Indiahikes is doing a lot of DIY mapping, right? Which I suddenly follow to do solo treks. But eventually, how did you build this organization altogether from that simple problem which you discovered and solved in the initial days?
Actually, the problems of the trekking world is continuously there. So we didn't see ourselves as an organization which has to grow the organization. We saw ourselves how to solve the trekking problem. If, for example, information was one, so we started documenting trails, exploring them, bringing it up. So all the greatest treks that you know in a country, at least 90% of them have been explored and documented by Indiahikes, and now they have become the most popular treks in our country. Like Rupkund, Rupin Pass, Kedarkantra, Kashmir Great Lakes, Sarsarmas, Buran Ghat, you name it. Across the country, the greatest treks which people trek on have been kind of, so that was trek discovery that we were doing. We were documenting it. Even now, even though Indiahikes is India's largest trekking organization, more people come to our website to take the documentation from our website to trek on their own. So a larger number of people are actually using the documentation to trek not only in the Himalayas, but in the Sahyadris, in the Eastern Ghats, Western Ghats, Vindhyas, wherever you name it, they're using that documentation. But trekking had other problems, how treks are organized, how treks are run, the safety systems, the environmental management system. So everywhere, if you look at it, even now in 2023, as we're stepping into that, we're talking about, trekking has still a lot of problems to be solved. So we are continuously working on these things. So we don't say, let's pick this problem. It comes naturally to us. We work on it, and that's how the trekkers kind of are very loyal to the values and principles which Indiahike stands for. And that's why they continue to trek with us. So they trek with us, they tell their friends, and more of them come and trek with us. So we have not actually done any marketing or advertising of Indiahikes, even till date. I'm talking about, even as I'm speaking, we have not spent any money on that. All of it, and most of it, even now, comes from uh, are trekkers who refer others and who talk about, and they become fans of the organization. There's a difference between a good customer and becoming fans. And it's when you have that fans is when, you kind of get the results that we kind of get. We are still working on the same problems. These things we don't not actively saying we want growth, we want growth, we want growth. That's not how we look at it at all.
That's a very different perspective to the way I understand the current founders look at growth in general. Because in the paid advertising market, as you must be aware of, the customer acquisition cost is going up. Facebook's ad network is not working pretty well, which is a major reason behind the fall in the startup ecosystem in the recent days. Right? So how do you suggest people who are building their startup to focus on growth and referrals? As you mentioned, creating fans in the initial days help Indiahikes a lot.
It's a very difficult question, Shubham, because industry to industry things are different. And what we are able to do, I'm not very sure if we were starting Indiahikes again, we would follow the same system, because I can see a lot of new people getting into the industry and they're really struggling to, match up to what we do. But couple of things don't change, that every startup or whatever you do, it needs to have a certain value systems with which you come with. And those value systems must radiate across to your customers or whoever it is. And then they kind of start becoming very loyal towards you. Now, you may be a tech startup, you may be a food startup, or whatever it is. That value systems that you stand for example, maybe it's a small eatery out of some Paharganj, but I stand for this, whatever, I stand for X, whatever is that X, it needs to go across to your customers. And that is the basic value systems which people identify you with. It is not really your price or anything, but that value, not value that you give in terms of price value, but that value systems that you come with. That is very important.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Moving forward, like any anecdotes that you would like to share while running a trekking organization for 14 years, you must have some amazing stories of self-discovery with yourself and what your customers have realized while trekking with Indiahikes in general.
Yeah, there are every day there are like countless stories. I mean, the stories are what we live with all the time. I mean, it happens 365 days, 24 hours. Is stories is going. Some good stories, some bad stories. Utal putal to chal hi raha hai. But I want to tell you that when we started Indiahikes, that the first three groups of Indiahikes, I have not shared the story online ever with anyone. I'll do that with you. The first three groups of Indiahikes actually didn't go well at all. And the first group which I took, the trekkers were very unhappy because I was very idealistic at that time. I was extremely idealistic. And I told this group of trekkers whom I was taking them on this Rupkund trek, and I was the trek leader. And I said, you can't go, you can't go, you can't go. This is where you will stay. This is the final camp. You can't go forward. And there was a huge mutiny. Why can't you take us? What have you done? No, no. I said, you are not prepared for this trek. You can't go. These are high altitude business kind of a thing. And I came down and they bashed me properly. They said, what is this? You're running an organization or you're putting your own money on this kind of a thing? Uh, I said, no, I'm standing by what I said. I'm not going to take you and risk other people's lives because you have not prepared for the trek. You need to prepare for a trek. In the second group, uh, I I actually asked one of the people from the first group whether he would become a trek leader for the second group, because that whole concept of trek leadership I was very keen on, that someone like me must go with trekkers, not a mountain person, someone who could identify, someone who could talk the same language that we are doing. And he went, and naturally, he doesn't have much experience. And the trekkers again came back. Oh, who have you sent? He doesn't know the road. He doesn't know this thing, that, and all that. I said, you fellows also are like that. I gave them a lot of this thing. I was quarreling with them right in the middle of the meadows. Third group also something like this happened. So I thought that's the end of Indiahikes. Three groups back to back. You can't expect to, do anything out of this. But surprisingly, even though I fought with them, even though I said this, all of them didn't have any qualms with the concept of Indiahikes. They understood what I was trying to do. They knew that it is something very different. Nobody has done something like this. They understood the value systems. And they are the ones, even though they fought with me, they are the ones who actually told others, you know what, if you have to go next time, if you go trek, try this new organization. It's doing something really wonderful, something path-breaking in our country. Try it out. And they are the ones who kind of gave the whole, the start to the organization. And even now, we fight with our trekkers a lot, but they come back and they understand why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, like you mentioned, you stand for your values, like because you also mentioned those criteria, right? You must have fitness of around, I guess, 5 kilometer in 30, 35 minutes, something of that sort.
We are quite unheard of in the trekking world. Nobody is asking anybody to prepare, because trekking is आप अपने responsibility लो ना. Why should I care about whether you are prepared or not? That was the norm earlier, and here is an organization that is saying that, you know what, unless you prepare, I'm not willing to take you. That whole shift that has happened in Indian trekking because of our insistence has now paid off in a very big way to trekkers and the trekking fraternity, the trekking community that as we see it today.
Got it. Got it. So moving forward, as you mentioned, like you launched a product which wasn't perfect in the first time itself, right? How important do you think for the entrepreneurs to launch something fast and learn from that rather than waiting for a perfect product?
I'll tell you something, Shubham. There is no perfect product even after 14 years. So there will never be a perfect product. It cannot be. So you just start with whatever you have, and then keep keep changing as you learn from your as you learn from the environment around you, and you keep changing it. I know in the startup world people say there is this thing, but I'm telling out of pure practical example, there is nothing, and that never can be. Even when you become 30 years old also, it's going to be the same thing. There's no perfect product.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Moving forward, again, you mentioned about uh, customer love, right? Customer coming back to your product again and again, retention in general, we talk about in growth terms. So how did you create this customer love as an organization, Indiahikes? Why trekkers particularly follow it? Why do they come back as your repeat customers? And any advice for the entrepreneurs who are trying to gain retention of their product?
As I told you earlier, Shubham, it is the values which you stand for, your values, your principles, and your customers understand that. You don't sometimes have to spell it out, you don't have to write it out, you don't have to give it on a piece of paper, but they understand it, they feel it. They understand it, and that's the big reason why they keep coming back. They need a reason to be associated with you. For example, we do so much for the environment, and you may know about it, that, we go all out, we are fighting with people non-stop and all that. Trekkers are witness to this. They see that, what, it is not something, they just do it. Sometimes even when they walk into our office in Bangalore, they see it, they visibly see it. So every right down to everyone, if you have a very strong value systems and culture, your your customers do understand it. Whatever it is, it may be an online organization or an offline organization, they do see it, and that's the biggest reason why they want to come back to you, and they stay loyal with you and they become your fans. Of course, if you can create fans, it is great. Not everyone can create fans, but you can create very strong loyalty if this is in place.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So we talked about product love. We talked about building something from scratch, maybe scrappy in the initial days. Now let's talk about the organizational build up that you have done, having employees, organizing them. So how did it start? Did you uh, are you the solo founder? Did you have a co-founder with you in place? And how did you build the organization from day zero itself?
See, we follow a principle which I think is good advice for most people is you start with who you know and what you have. You don't start with an ideal team member or this person's qualification is or that person's background is. You start with who you know and what you have. So I knew my fellow trekkers. So I started with that. So my co-founder became Sandhya, who was a fellow trekker in the very first group of Rupkund trek that I was going. So Sandhya and her husband were doing this trek and they became my tent mates. And I would do chapar, Indiahikes, I want to do this, I want to do that. And they got very interested. They were techies, they were very senior software industry, software folks in the industry. And they became very interested, very fascinated with what I was trying to do with the Indiahikes. And after the trek got over, we stayed in touch and I would do chapar along with them. This is what I want to do. And one day I took them out on a local trek and I told them that, we have been talking for a very long time. Would you like to work along with me? I had nothing to give them because, you know what, they're senior software engineers. The salaries they used to earn 10, 12 years ago is even more than what I can pay them now. So the thing is that, but they said, yes, we would like to join you in this adventure. Which one of us will you take? That kind of flabbergasted me. I was not expecting that kind of a response, but ultimately Sandhya joined and she became the co-founder at Indiahikes because that's the only thing I could give her. The first few people, employees that joined us were friends' wives. This one, known another trekker here. For example, the first trekker was first trek leader was a fellow trekker who went along with Sandhya and I. So that person became a trek leader. So it's always who you know and what you have. So we work with who you know and what we have. We don't really go with this thing. Even now, 14 years later, it's more or less the same principle. Anything new that we are trying to do, who we know and what we have. And that's how we, this thing. This has been very well documented by a lot of entrepreneurial studies, which has happened across the globe afterwards, but we were not aware of it then. It came by instinct. This is what we do. But now that we see the studies across the world, we are quite validated that this seems to be the right path to do it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like having customers join your board and then taking it forward is one of its kind example, right? Moving forward, how did you make sure that the culture, the values that you stand for, that Sandhya stands for, that your board stands for, is followed by the trek leaders, by your employees, and conveyed to the people in the right way?
This is something we are very strict about. We are very strong that the values and the culture of the organization must be very deep rooted and very strong. It must go down right up to the mule man who is there in the mountain. So we 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 spend a lot of energy in kind of talking about our culture and making sure that we live it. That living that culture, living the values is very important by whoever it is. So if someone does not adhere to it, then we don't kind of have them associated with us, or we find that somebody is a little bit odd over here, or he's not matching our values and culture, then we ask that person, it's better you leave now, or we find a system to not work with that person. So having people who can identify that is very, very important. Not we don't identify that, we kind of help that person grow into our values and culture. So a lot of training, imbibing and immersion in the values and the culture of the organization happens from day one of a person joining, and it kind of stays very intense for the first 7 8 months, but it kind of stays forever, however long they are there in the organization.
Got it. Got it. Moving forward, like from my personal experience, I think now we have discussed about the product, the organization. Let's talk about treks a bit in general, because you have been a seasoned trekker, have built the largest trekking organization in India. So how does it help people in general to discover themselves? This is something I can talk about in my last 5 years of trekking experience, but you are quite more seasoned. So you'll have more stories to share. I would like to hear from you on.
The trekking is very transformative. It's extremely transformative. Almost, if you see most of the sports that people do, trekking requires very little. It requires only your two legs. So, but that whole journey of doing a trek, the whole process of doing a trek is extremely transformative for the mind, body, and spirit. And this transformation, there's a science behind it. It's not like it just happens. What happens when you trek is that a lot of good hormones are pumped into your body. Your serotonin, your endorphins, your dopamines, your oxytocins, all of these are pumped in very large quantities when you trek, a physical thing which you do. Plus, there's no distraction, there's no mobile, there's nothing. You are mixing with a lot of like-minded people without any distraction. You're having very healthy conversation. You're laughing a lot. You are, pulling legs. There's a very light banter which is going on, and singing, and a lot of things are happening. And there's absolutely, and you have very intimate conversation with strangers whom you never thought. Even with your friends, you don't do that because no distraction. Plus, this hormones are playing a lot and doing it over day in day out, and you're immersed in sceneries which are only positive from morning to night. You're seeing a beautiful sunrise, you're seeing a beautiful sunset, you're seeing a snow patch, you're seeing forest, you're seeing flowers, you're seeing a trail, you're seeing only good things. So all these good things pumped in together along with the hormones, along with the good conversation, is extremely therapeutic and transformative in nature. And that's why everyone must trek. And that's the basic vision we come forward with, that everyone must trek because it is very transformative. And it happens by naturally. You don't need to go to a Guruji or spirituality or anything. You just have to do a trek. And that's one of the things which I recommend people. You're feeling down and out, you're feeling not so good about yourself, you're depressed. Just go and do a trek. And that will take care of 80% of the problems.
That's yeah, that's something very realistic in general. When we are talking about mental health issues these days, trekking has a huge potential to help people out in these circumstances. Moving forward, Arjun, any failures that you've had during your journey in Indiahikes in the last 14 years, maybe around COVID or in some time in between, that you would like to share, and how did you overcome that? Because in entrepreneurship, we always talk about success, but there is a lot going on behind the scenes.
I think failure happens every half an hour. Okay? So it is something which happens on a daily basis. The thing is that you become stoic about it after some time. You have to, you can't do anything. This will happen. So lot of failures. See, COVID actually was not that big a failure. I want to tell you. See, 2 years we couldn't do anything. That didn't mean that India had stopped. We were working, we were running, we were documenting trails because that's our basic vision, right? So we didn't stop anything. Yes, our trek running part of it was not happening, but the rest of the organization was working as hard, maybe harder during COVID times, because we could focus on what we generally do. But failures, though, we had innumerable failures. See, for example, I'll tell you, we were when early in the years, no, when we were working in Ladakh, and we opened up this trek, Chadar Frozen River Trek for Indian this thing, and then it exploded. People said, we can now do a frozen river trek in our country. It's a huge thing, and we kind of defined that trail and that number of days you spend there and all those things. But then that local associations over there, no, they were very jealous of this whole thing that we were bringing in and all that. They wanted to have share of the pie, ye do, paisa do, ye karo, wo karo, and all that. And it's a buzz up. We are not going to entertain you. But then that kind of created a lot of animosity between them and us. They were kind of cartels, hooligans. So we'll beat you up, do things, kind of a thing. So we said we'll stop working at Ladakh. So Ladakh is a place where we would like to work, but we stopped working. We said we will not work. They said, "Aapka business kharab ho jayega." We said it's okay. We didn't start Indiahikes to do business as how you call it. So we walked out of it. They said, then we decided that, that if Ladakh is not something, that we made a promise to ourselves, Sandhya and I, that, our country will see a lot of great winter treks. And our country doesn't have much winter treks. And today we have so many 7 or 8 winter treks, all brought out by Indiahikes. And so failures are there non-stop. Every now and then we face so much of obstacle, especially from local associations or, from the government because of lack of understanding, of lack of this thing. So non-stop this it goes on, sometimes big, sometimes small. It keeps going on. So but even now, even today, as I'm speaking with you, there's a huge issue in the Joshimath area where the local association says, no, why are you going on this route? You cannot go on this route. You're not getting business. You all are taking everything. Why are you camping there? You cannot camp there. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, even after 14 years, you have to go through this. Even as I'm speaking to you, this is going on. So
Yeah, that's the reality, I guess. So how do you manage having negativity around you, staying positive, and you have done it since last 14 years, right?
as I
So
said, you have to be stoic,
yeah,
Nothing is as good or nothing is as bad as it looks. It's a simple one line. So if you're stoic, you're fine.
got it.